Good evening, Dr. Moore, Dr. Moon, Dr. Medival, Dr. Underwood, Dr. Roberts, Mr. Neal, invited guests, and to the over 400 participants that are online, welcome. My name is John Ramirez. I'm the Dean of Operations for the College of Doctoral Studies. And on behalf of the students, the employees, and the faculty of the university, it is my privilege and sincere honor to welcome you to this event. We're extremely happy to have you with us to share this research that's focused on the severe shortage of Black male educators in P-12 education. And we welcome your participation as we engage in a dialogue that we hope leads to a solution. I want to thank the National Network of State Teachers of the Year and Education Post for their involvement and support of this important initiative. Today's roundtable will include incredible leaders in the areas of diversity and inclusion from Arizona Multicultural Education Conference, the White Privilege Conference, the Sept Union High School District, and Maryville High School here in Phoenix. Thank you for joining us. This evening's conversation will center on the findings of a white paper authored by the University Research Center for the Center of Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Research, Dr. Kim Underwood and her team of senior research fellows. The research brings to light the important role Black male educators have on our children of color, the realities of recruitment and retention and mobility challenges of Black male educators, and the serious implications the lack of Black male educators in teaching positions have on this country. The research also includes recommendations that will support future actions and initiatives. However, to influence change, it will require a deliberate strategy and collaborative effort at the school, district, local, state, and federal levels. The content of the study and the dialogue that we are about to engage in is important and reflects the university's belief that a diverse and inclusive workforce within all levels of education is critical to ensure students receive a vibrant, quality educational experience. Since 1976, the University of Phoenix has supported non-traditional adult learners from different races, genders, social economic backgrounds, and experiences. This is evident in the diverse nature of our student population, which is currently comprised of 60%, 67% women, and over 60% students of color. As a result of our commitment to inclusion and diversity, we were recognized this year by College Factual as one of the top 10% diverse universities in the country. I'm also proud to say that in its annual Top 100 Graduate Degree Producer Report, Diverse Issues in Higher Education recognized the University of Phoenix among the top institutions, graduating underrepresented students with associate, bachelor's, master's degrees, and doctoral research and scholarship degrees. And for the past 4 years, Minority Access has honored the University of Phoenix during the National Role Models Conference as an institution committed to diversity. Now, the university is very proud of our diverse and inclusive efforts, and the accolades that we've received, we're extremely proud of. But we're even more proud of the diverse nature of our students, their successes, and their accomplishments. However, more has to be done. Now, before I hand over the mic to our next speaker, please prepare yourself to be challenged with a complex problem. Be inspired to help create change, and be excited about what the future is about to bring. Now, I would need volumes and probably hours to give you the background of our next speaker. She has over 2 decades of experience in the realm of diversity and inclusion, including consulting, teaching, research, accreditation, administration within higher education and government. She presently serves as the University of Phoenix's Research Center, or Research Chair for the Center of Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Research with our college, the College of Doctoral Studies, and is also a subject matter expert and lecturer at Georgetown University. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my friend and role model, Dr. Kimberly Underwood.
You're good. You're fine. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming out. And let me frame this white paper. And really thinking about our partnership, and we partnered with the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. We wanted to do something that had meaning. If we were going to come together as two organizations, it had to be around something that mattered. And we quickly agreed that looking at diversifying P through 12 education mattered to us. And so coming together, doing this work, it was important. And I feel honored to have the privilege of doing this type of work for both agencies. And so I have to say thank you to that. Also, I have to thank my team. I had the dream team. And so I know Dr. Medgar Roberts was on my team. He was my right hand in this. Dr. Donna Smith, Dr. Hillary Johnson-Lutz, and Dr. Joy Taylor. Those were researchers within the team, and they did an amazing job. And so when we came together and wanted to look at the issue of diversity within P through 12 education, we came across this number, 2%. And when we looked at the diversity overall within P through 12 education, people of color, faces of color made up 20% of all teachers. And so that's not too bad, although we know we can do better there. But then we specifically did a breakdown of that 20% and found that Black men made up 2% of all teachers in our nation's classrooms. So for those of you out here in the audience, let's think about 2. If you go to the mechanic and the mechanic says you have 2% left as far as tread on your tires, what do? Your employer says, this week, I'm only going to give you 2% of your paycheck. Do we now act? Do we fight? Do we have something to say? Do we come back and do we challenge? And so now today I say to you, 2% of our teachers are males of color, Black men. What does that mean? And there are different schools of thoughts on why we need Black men in teaching in K through 12. The first says that Black men are the best at teaching young Black males. School of thought number 1. The second is that Black men are needed to teach all students of color because they can relate. And let me say, through our research, we found that there are some positive statistics there. Increased test scores, a better view and a better thought about education overall, better self-esteem. But there's also a third view that says teachers of color, and specifically Black men, are needed because of the focus and the sole purpose of education, which is to create good citizens of all shades and all colors, to be future doctors, future leaders, future teachers. And so therefore I say to you, how do we increase 2%? how do we focus on creating people in the future? Now, keep in mind, let's talk about another number. Right now, students make up over 50%. Students of color make up over 50% of our student population. And the United States Census Bureau has said by 2044, our society is going to be a majority minority population. So how do we move the needle around 2%? That is the focus of today's conversation. And I thank you so much for coming and hope that we do this topic well today. So thank you. Turning it over to our moderator.
All right. Well, I am happy to be moderating this panel discussion today. My name is Lane Wright. I am from Education Post, and I get the privilege of interviewing all of these awesome folks up here on stage and digging into this issue a little bit. We will be taking some questions at the end of this from our audience here. So if you think of something you want to ask the panel, keep it in mind, write it down if you have to, and you'll have a chance later. We're also going to be taking some questions near the end from our Skype audience that's watching us now. Again, I think that's around 450 is what we're at right now, roughly. So we appreciate everybody who's tuning in on Skype, and we'll get this started. I actually want to go and just briefly introduce everybody here on the panel, just so we know who we're talking to. I'm going to start at the far end with Dr. Mendeville, Dr. Kevin Mendeville, who's the superintendent at Tempe Union High School. Then next to him, we have Dr. Cliff Moon, who's the director of the Arizona Multicultural Conference and director of University and Inclusion at Tempe Union School District. After that, of course, we have Dr. Underwood, who really needs no further introduction. Would you like me to say your title again? I can't. Yes? No? We're good? Okay, everybody's good. And then after that, we have Kareem Neal. Yeah, there you are. Sorry, you're on my, you guys are not sitting in the same order that I wrote it down here, so you gotta forgive me. Kareem Neal, who's a special education teacher at Maryvale High School, and he's also the 2019 State Teacher of the Year for Arizona. And then next to him, we have Dr. Medgar Roberts, who's a co-author on this white paper, and he's also a senior fellow of the University of Phoenix Center for Workplace Diversity and Inclusion and Research. And finally, we have Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who's a motivational speaker and also the director of the White Privilege Conference. All right, got that all out. Now, I'm actually going to change my plan a little bit, and this is a question I have not given them in advance. Sorry, but Dr. Underwood made me think of something when she talked about the different schools of thought as to why Black male educators are needed. And I'm curious. I don't know if we're all of the same school of thought up on the stage. So I want to toss it to the panel and just ask you, what school of thought are you? Why do we need Black male educators in the classroom? And keep this brief. So we have a few questions. We want to have a robust conversation, but give me a sentence or two on why you think we need Black male educators in the classroom. Anybody can go. Yeah, there's no order here. We're Wild West out here. So. You got it.
So I go with the third school of thought. I think that Black male educators are useful for every student. And if you look at our political climate, I think part of the reason for that is because we don't have as much familiarity between people of different backgrounds and different cultures. And when you have people in the classroom that represent all of that, you're going to have a better chance to have dialogue among different groups of people.
Great. So I think like schools, when you go into school for the first time, you see your surroundings and you think, all right, is this place for me? Or when you go to any place, is this place for me or is this place not for me? And I think in schools right now, Black students are like, this is not for me, right? I think about like how much I love school, and everybody who knows me knows that I really love school a lot, more than everything. But most of the people I grew up with, they didn't love school like that. They were like, they didn't even understand why I loved school like that, right? And I had one Black teacher throughout my schooling, and I still love school, and I love school because of my grandma and my mom, right? But when you go to a place and you don't feel like it's for you, it makes it harder for you to kind of, you know, have that same kind of love.
Anybody else want to go take this question? You don't have to be so polite, and you don't have to wait for me to call on you either. You can just go.
I think it's very critical that we have African American male educators in classrooms in front of our students, regardless if the student is African American or Latino or Asian or Native American. If you take a look at racial identity theory, the theory goes that students, kids of color, often go through a developmental transition period where they begin to dislike themselves, where they begin to compare themselves to their white peers. And nobody necessarily says anything to them, but just based upon the observations that they see in the classroom and that they see in their environment, that their skin color denotes a sense of inferiority. And unless, according to the theory, unless there is some explicit intervention in that thought process, these students of color will think less of themselves. And so it's critical that we do have African American males and males of color in our classrooms.
I'm just going to build off Brother Moon and really reiterate that this is not a new phenomenon, the absence of Black people, Black men in the classroom. Like, there's a reason for that. And so I think I'm on the side that I believe that where we've seen the most success of Black students reaching their highest level possible, Black excellence, Black genius, is when Black people were present in the classroom. And so I think over the last 50 years, Brown v. Board of Education, lots has happened, lots of different kinds of, plus and minuses, but I just feel like for the next 25 years, 50 years, I don't think we can withstand the kind of results we're seeing when it comes to Black boys in the classroom, in school buildings, in schools across America. And so I think I'm arguing for more Black males for the production of Black excellence and Black genius, which I think has been missing in the numbers and the way that we saw it produced during even some of the most segregated times.
I would add to and agree with all of these esteemed individuals present. For me, it's very simple. It's a natural yes. It's just, how could anyone think anything otherwise? And I would add, it's not only Black males, it's males of color. I mean, it's quality teaching, it's all of that combined. And Kareem made his point about where the interest sparked because he had family encouragement and saw that, grandma and mom loved teaching. And I have a different background in that I was just gravitated to teaching early on because my family all went into the business sector, and I didn't even get that at all. So, but to me, it's just commonplace. Yes, we're in a diverse world. It makes sense. It's real. It feels good, all of that. And it's incumbent upon us to set the conditions where we can attract more Black educators, but educators of color in general.
All right, well, I'm going to move on unless somebody else is dying to say something. Dr. Underwood, do you have something you want to add? Please. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. So y'all read the report. What's the most surprising thing or the most compelling thing that stuck out to you from that report, from having our say, that white paper?
Most compelling for me, which I don't know if this is what the researchers intended, but is where my work lies, is really with that 2% means that, or that 20% means there's 80% white. And my work and research has shown 80% of that white is 65 to plus or so white women. And so I think that what I'm really alarmed by and concerned by, in addition to this in addition to pursuing more Black men in the classroom, is the presence of white people, particularly white women in the classrooms, and in some cases, a real lack of skill, a lack of exposure, a lack of love in some cases. And so I think that's what's been resonating for me as I think about this project and trying to be in participation simultaneously and looking at that 2% or 20% and thinking about that 80% who over the next 25 years, that's who we're gonna have to rely on to produce some different results while we continue to try to push these numbers in a better direction.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little more on when you talk about white women lacking the skill and the exposure, you're talking about in reference to working with children of color specifically?
Specifically Black boys, yes.
Okay.
And this is not only something the research is saying, but also in the work we've been doing, interviewing white women teachers. They're saying, I've learned nothing about the population that I'm working with or that's coming into the classroom related to the numbers that Dr. Underwood was talking about. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they hate the kids they're working with, but they've just not had the professional training and sometimes their personal and professional exposure. And in some cases, there's even some outright malicious behavior. And so I think that that's what jumped out for me and thinking about 80% day after day, that's what some of our kids are facing. Not saying all those 80 is there, but just saying in that 80, there's gotta be some of that.
Yeah, I want to give the rest of the panel a chance to respond to that. And also maybe if you're inclined, tell me how you feel about, is the fact that you've got Black men in the classroom automatically going to solve that problem of like understanding the culture of the boys? Go ahead, take it away, guys. What do you think?
So one of the things in the paper that stood out to me was like the part about the invisible tax. And I think about that because it hit home for me in my 23-year teaching career. It was a difficult process in schools. Like I was never one of those teachers where it was like, man, I might leave because I always loved it. However, it wasn't made easy for me, and I think that 19 years of my teaching career, I held myself back in order to protect myself in schools, and I feel like that invisible tax, being how a school is looking at a Black person to lead, right? To say, oh, go deal with some discipline problems because you're a big Black person. A person actually said to me, you're a big Black person, so your students are going to listen to you, right? When I first came to the school I teach at right now, a great school, a super diverse school, right? And not just that though, like discipline, right? And when I say discipline, I mean discipline that happened to me, right? I went through lots of things that I should not have gone through because everybody is looking at me like, what is he going to do wrong? No one was looking at me like, oh, wow, he is a dynamic teacher. Or I wonder what he has to say about special education. Hardly anybody until I won Teacher of the Year, right? Before that, it was just, I wonder what he's going to do wrong. Is he looking at people a certain way? Is he being extra rough with his students? These are the kinds of things that when I read it, it hit home for me because I'm like, it could have derailed the average person. Like I had this internal fortitude that was just like, I'm not leaving, I'm staying, I'm fighting because I love this, right? And I love my students. But I wouldn't have begrudged somebody who went through what I went through and was like, all right, I'm gonna go and be an engineer. I went to school for engineering. Or I'm gonna go and be whatever else.
Is it possible to get an example from you without like defaming your current school?
It's not just my current school. It is most schools I taught. I mean, the example I gave you happened like, so I was being toured the school when I got the job, and a person who was the teacher there said, oh, they're not going to mess with you because you're a big Black guy.
Oh, I mean specifically on the discipline though that you faced, or the scrutiny that you faced.
So discipline I faced, I'll give you what I feel is the worst example. So one day a football player came to my room after school and he said, Mr. Neal, they were about to play a road game. He was like, can I buy a Gatorade? I was like, sure. Right now, we sold at lunchtime at school. We would then divvy up the cash, give it to the bookstore, right? I had a lockbox in my room. So this dude was like, can I get this Gatorade? Sure. Sold him a Gatorade, $1.25. He walked out of the classroom. Somebody said, where'd you get that Gatorade from? He's like, bought it from Mr. Neal. Somebody came to my classroom, was like, did you sell a student Gatorade? I was like, yes, I sold him a Gatorade. It's like, where's the money? I was like, in my lockbox in my desk. It's $1.25. Okay, cool. Left, and then I was called to the district office. And the district actually, at the district office, they said, you know, one of the reasons why people get fired the most in this district is for mishandling money. So I wasn't supposed to be selling after school. I was supposed to be selling at lunch so that I can give the money to the bookstore. It was $1.25 though, so I didn't think about it like that. But when he left my classroom and it was like, where'd you get that from? Mr. Neal's class. And that's when I feel like it happened.
So this is a great example of some of the cultural issues that we face in schools where there's only one or two, if any, Black men. Right? I want to give other people a chance to talk about some parts of that report they found compelling, or respond to anything else that's been said.
Yeah, what stood out for me, well, several things stood out for me, but one that made me think back to my experiences in the classroom was when Dr. Underwood had mentioned that oftentimes African-American male educators are used to discipline other African-American male students. And reflecting on my teaching career, I can recall that I would get several students sent to my classroom, go to Mr. Moon's classroom. Why? Because you can't behave in my classroom. So go over there and sit in his room until you know how to act correctly. So they would come to my classroom and I would actively engage them in the lessons and the activities that I was doing. As a result of that, those students were then transferred into my classroom. As a result of that, those students were making A's and B's. And when it would come to parent-teacher conferences, they were failing all the other classes, but they were making A's and B's. Now here's the tragedy of this and the irony. I began to doubt myself because they were failing all the other classes. I must be doing something wrong. And it took a lot of introspection for me to realize that I was not the one who was harming the kids. I was paying attention to their needs. I was showing them that they were able to be successful. But it took a long time for me to figure that out. So that resonated with me.
Thank you. Megger?
So I'm a strong believer in the fact that numbers tell us what's going on. It's the analysis that tells us the how and the why. And I think that the thing that stuck out to us when we were looking at reasons why we only have 2% of Black males as educators is because there's an opportunity cost to being a teacher. I mean, you come into a career, you finish a four-year degree, you have student loans that you have to pay back. And when you do that, if you become an engineer, you know you're going to make a salary that's going to pay that off. If you become a doctor, along with all the insurances and stuff that you have to pay, you know that you're going to be able to pay that off. But as a teacher, starting at a teacher salary, having the knowledge that you're going to be able to go in and do this job and provide for your family, and as a cultural piece of that, with the understanding that you are the person who is the breadwinner for your family on a teacher salary, there's an opportunity cost that keeps you from even entering into that realm in the first place. And so, like, I think about my career in education, and I mean, this is the beginning of year 28 for me. And all of the times when I needed to have resources available to me to be able to do it, and I was lucky enough to be born into a situation where I had those resources to do it, in a place where many of my colleagues don't have those resources to be able to move to a new school, to be able to support themselves on a teacher salary and nothing more, to be able to, you know, those kinds of things aren't there. And I think when I really looked at what our numbers were and where our Black males are going in terms of careers, the real thing that got my interest was it just costs too much to be a teacher as a Black male with the other opportunities that are available out there.
First of all, I'm gonna have to check your ID because you don't look like you are old enough to have been teaching for 28 years. But I'm gonna let that slide
I
for a
started
minute.
teaching in 1992.
Wow. But to your point about the salary, I'm curious about that too, because it definitely is something that's keeping Black men from choosing to go into the profession. But is it any different than what's keeping other, like, non-Black men from choosing the profession? Do you see a difference in that?
I think that when you go and you look at where our wealth is in this country, like the other thing which you go through and you look at, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but when you look at the numbers in terms of where our wealth is not with our minority populations. And as a consequence of that, and then on top of that, when you look at the number of our teachers that are women, it's starting to change a little bit now, but the breadwinner is generally the male in the family. That has been how it's been, and hopefully we'll get some changes where that's concerned. And so, yeah, I do think that that's a significant part of what it is. I mean, I think about what my salary was when I first started teaching in a small town in Georgia, and I don't even know. I mean, thankfully my rent was only $300 a month, but the amount of money that I made was minuscule. Like it was shocking how little money that I made. And I was just lucky enough to be in a situation where I had scholarships to go to college. I had parents who could support me when I had difficulty. So I was in a position where I could afford my habit of being a teacher. And I think we have a lot of Black males who can't.
And Lane, let me just say that, you know, for pay is one factor. And it was really important for us to look at the full trajectory of the Black male career in getting to the classroom. And specifically in that period of K through 12, when you talk about the experiences, when you talk about the over-discipline of students of color, when you talk about bias within standardized testing, when you talk about, you know, the unjust sentencing within the juvenile system, you know, all of these play into factors into why, you know, someone does not choose teaching as a profession. And not to mention that cycle of, if I don't see a Black man in a position as a teacher, how do I envision that as something that's feasible for me, you know, as a career option? And so it was just a combination of, I think, factors that I saw and I think we identified that just really impacted those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Mandeville?
I was just going to respond on some of the literature that confirmed my thinking and just some practice over the last 34 years that, you know, we have to look at where the priorities are in our country around education. And that in itself is impacting the talent pool in general, because education today, it doesn't have that, and still struggles in the past, but doesn't have that support and priority and same emphasis as maybe some other careers. And yet it's one of those most noble and impacting of careers that anybody could choose. But on top of that, I wanted to respond to just on some of the research with having systemic, deliberate effort in a culture, in your system. And I'm talking about a district in my perspective as a principal, but also as a superintendent now, that what you have to do to be deliberate with that. And part of that deliberateness is also looking within your own heart to say, this is what I truly believe. This is what I practice. This is what I value. And have that be a part of what your culture is all about that you're trying to build. And I will say that on behalf of Tempe Union High School District, that is what we are trying to build, and it's step by step. So some of the actions and priorities that we've had in our district over the past number of years have been to that end, to ensure that we deliberately announce who we are, that we're proud of it, that we value this, and therefore we're going to make deliberate, conscious efforts to that end in our goals, in our operational plan, in our core values and beliefs, in how we hire folks, how we induct our new employees, especially our employees of color. All of that matters in a master plan if you're going to have some meaningful, enduring cultural change in your organization. And so in reading some of the literature, it just affirmed what we're doing in Tempe Union. And I sit by this great gentleman where we have a long history together in two districts. But you know, it's that deliberateness of effort and value, and it starts there. And I'm fortunate because I have that platform as superintendent. I also have a governing board that's supportive. So I reside in the community of Tempe that celebrates and actually says that they embrace diversity, you know, and has said that for a number of years. So all those elements factor in as well.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So with that, I think about recruiting efforts, and I think Phoenix Union does a great job with that also, and it sounds like Tempe is doing great work. The pool of people, like, it's not going to increase that much if schools are places where people don't feel like they belong, right? So if Black students are like, this is not for me, I talked about that earlier because that is how most of the Black people I knew felt coming up. Why would they then say, all right, I got this degree. I mean, I graduated high school, I'm going to college, teaching is the way for me, when they didn't even like being in the school at all. And so, and that's what I feel like we need to figure out a way to create that part of the pool. Like, oh, people who love school, it's easy. Like for me, so people are looking at me like, you're not going to be an engineer? Like, and like my brother's an engineer, and you know, I'm like this math dude, and I went to college for engineering, and I was just like, I want to be a teacher, right? I love school, despite the fact that it really wasn't for people like me.
So I was going to ask, which problem do y'all think is most solvable? But now you're making me think I should ask, which problem is the most important to be focusing our attention on first? Because, you know, we've got there's a few issues here. We've got starting with K-12 education, right? Like Black students are less likely to graduate from high school than their white counterparts. They're less likely to be accepted into college, less likely to graduate from college, and so forth. So like we talk about this leaky pipeline in the report, and you can really see that how by the end of that pipeline, there just isn't a big pool of Black applicants trying to get into the teaching field to begin with, let alone the fact that it may not be appealing to a lot of Black students because of the culture or because of some of the practices that are actually happening in schools. So I'm going to put that to the panel. What is the most, I mean, does everybody agree with Kareem that we should be focusing on that culture aspect first and making it a welcoming place?
If I may, I will just chime in because I have a perspective of teacher, principal, human resources, because I did that and recruited and did all that, and then now as superintendent. Conditions. We are responsible, and I've told our employees, you know, I can't control what happens out of the boundaries of Tempe Union High School District, but I have a lot of say-so as to what happens in it and the conditions we set for our students and for our employees and what we expect out of you. So those conditions within the classroom, those conditions within the school setting, the conditions within the district, the conditions within our athletic programs, all of that, we have control over that. And all of that matters significantly when we're trying to create an environment that's safe, that's happy, because my goal is always to make sure our kids are learning at the highest levels. They learn a lot, they're having some fun, they're making friends, because that's all our parents want, you know, that they're socially embedded and engaged in their schools, but we're in control. We as leaders are in control of the conditions that we set forth in our learning environments. And from the bus, you know, our bus stops, we do training with that. All of that matters in your organization. It's got to permeate everywhere. And for me, that's one thing that we have made some very deliberate efforts in around that end.
And I'm going to echo that. I just accepted a position as an assistant principal. So I started as an assistant principal this year. And one of the things that we are focusing on more than anything else is trying to make sure that the school is a welcoming environment where every child that's there feels like this is a place where we want them to be, where every teacher that's there feels like this is a place that we value their efforts and what they're doing. And I think that if we can do that, it's going to fill our pipeline for the future. Now, the question then becomes, like, what does that do for the short term? Because we have a short term problem that we need to be able to fix. And that's not going to fix it short term. We're talking about kids that are in school now, even if we're talking about seniors, that's 5 years down the road. And we're really not. I'm at a middle school, so we're talking 10 years. But I do think that that's really important, that we need schools to be places where we value everybody who's in them.
Does anybody have a specific example? So Dr. Mendeville, I'm going to go back to you for a second because you talked about these conditions, but can you make that tangible for us? Can you give us a sense of like what specifically you're doing that would change the conditions? I don't know if you want to pick like the bus stop, but give us a visual. What does that look
I'll
like?
look at induction. Okay, induction. And we 2 years ago spent a lot of time on our core values and beliefs, what we believe in. And we had a process that was inclusive, and we really wanted to grapple with that and who we are at Tempe Union. So we have our core beliefs and values. So, and our top one is students first, and embracing diversity, removing barriers for learning, all that, you know, you hear, but I return to that all the time. So induction, we revamped our entire induction process for our new teachers. We're going to be doing that for all teachers. Our tenured folks, it's a little more different. We have to have a more inclusive process to get them on board a little bit more organically. But our folks that are coming forward, we had a very deliberate practice to infuse every day a piece of who we are with diversity. What does that mean? What do we mean when we want all kids, that it is the expectation in Tempe Union that all kids will learn at high levels? And guess what, teachers, it's our responsibility to make that happen. Diversify your teaching, all those efforts. And then I simply said to folks, if this organization and this culture and this direction isn't for you, then you need to find somewhere else where you can work. It's real simple. You just have to be deliberate and state it, because it's so much of a value for me as a superintendent, but also what we're trying to build in our organization, that diversity matters. And when I see that, because we are trying to increase our staff of color at all levels, and not just at the custodial level or in the, you know, that kind of thing, because people have a misconception of that. But our teachers, our administrators, and I think we've done a brilliant job of recognizing talent out there, but we need more because our demographic is wonderfully diverse. And so I think when you set the tone as a leader, as a superintendent, it's incumbent upon me to say that directly, so there's no question about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I feel like I should do a disclaimer before I make the statement to say that this is in no way reflective of the report delivered by these scholars. However, I do think often what's missing, as I listen to Brother Kareem talk, is the mention of white. That we are actually trying to create a kind of environment that's inclusive in a place that was designed in the opposite way. And that if we're not naming white supremacy, white cultural dominance as a part of the challenge that we're facing and addressing this issue, I think for me, that's one of the more pressing ones. Not to say white people, white supremacists, but to definitely say that white supremacy ideology was a part of designing schools. And so that's why what we're trying to do in the project that we're working with is, yes, there may be some challenges with these young kids of color, these Black boys, and that connection to becoming Black teachers. Yeah, there may be some problems, some challenges with their communities and with their parents. But the number one common denominator when we see these gaps, these challenges, is white. White school, white teacher, white administrator. And I think that when we start naming that and then assigning some professional development, personal development around that, to me, I think simultaneously while we try to fix this crack or leak in the pipeline, that I don't know which one ranks over the other, but I do think we're trying to continue to remind people that we have to have the conversations about the structure that we're trying to change and providing the kind of training and preparation for particularly the 80% of white people who in a lot of cases are facing students that they haven't been prepared to face.
Okay.
And so what I wonder, like, on, on the basis of those remarks, is whether what we're dealing with where schools are built, whether we're talking about something that's structural or whether we're talking about something that's cultural. And I think that when we start talking about what schools and educational organizations are, that like as I think about the structure of schools and the study that I've done with that and the things that I know about that, I don't see anything within the structure of how a school is built that is endemically, that makes it have to be a predominantly white institution. I think that comes down to the question of relationships, which is what Dr. Mendeville was talking about, which is what Kareem was talking about. And I think that if we start at that point, if we start at the point where we are taking something, we're taking this thing called school, and we're making it a place that where everyone is included. And you know, the word when we were doing diversity training when I was a young teacher was we wanted to tolerate all cultures, which is absolutely completely wrong, right? We want to accept all cultures. We want to include all cultures. And I think if we do that within the structure of the school systems that we have now, that works. Now, here's the problem outside of that, which talks to the opportunity cost, which talks to induction, is the question of, you know, where is the funding coming from and how are we funding schools? Like that's the only structural element I can think of.
That's a big one, though.
That would, yeah, it is, it's huge. That would be something that would re-entrench schools being segregated or having better schools for one group of people than you have for others. And so like if we were to think about that, if we were to think about that funding element along with the relationships element, finding some kind of a way to make the school funding more equitable, because let's face it, where the money is where a lot of things are happening. That might be a really important part of it, and that might be an answer to the presumption of the predominantly white institution being the American school, because I don't know that that's an endemic part of what we're doing.
All right, so I'm hearing a couple things here in terms of solutions and how we go about changing this. The one is start while the kids are young, right? While the students are still in school, to try to change the culture of how they perceive the field of teaching, right? That is a career, and make it a viable career option for them. That's a long-term plan. And then I'm hearing the other thing about changing the culture of some adults to also make the school more inclusive, not just for students, but for teachers as well, especially teachers of color. I don't feel like that's getting us there quite yet, but I don't know. Is there more to do? Dr. Underwood, I know you've got some recommendations in your paper. You want to touch on some of those? Like, what should we be doing next? Like, what comes after this, besides having a nice discussion on stage?
You know, it's interesting, and I will say that in doing this project and writing this paper with this magnificent team, you know, I had to think. And in my career, you know, I've been over a Department of Doctoral Studies in the College of Education. So working with faculty with education leadership. I've been an associate dean in a College of Education. And I never once thought in those positions of leadership about this at a global level, right? And so one thing that I will say is that a lot of the responsibility has historically fallen squarely in the lap of teacher preparation. And I think that, you know, unfairly, because this is a issue that cannot be solved in silos. That's why we looked at the trajectory to bring to light the challenges at each stage. And specifically, one of the things that we talked about in the paper was, okay, you can get Black men in the classroom, but there's still that level of turnover when it comes to retention. And so we need work there. And so I think that, in looking at where do we go next, now I know as a researcher and with our research team, I mean, we're committed to specifically looking at area where we knew there was not a lot of research, and that was on the socialization piece and what goes on in the classroom. We really wanted to delve into that to understand that piece of the process, to understand why there was a high level of turnover and it wasn't there. And so we're committed for the next year, we're doing the 100 Black Male Speak Project. And so we are talking in depth to 100 Black male educators to understand what goes on in the classroom. And we want to really talk about that and publish that and get that out in the open, but that's one piece. And so I think that, this has to be done collectively. It has to be done at a high level. Even looking in our research, Howard University had an amazing program where they were federally funded and they were generating, these really high performing Black male educators. But what happens when the funding leaves? And so therefore it becomes high level, across levels, and it has to be long term. And so really being able, I think that this is just, the tip of the iceberg. And we really have to continue to have these conversations with people that can create change. And I think that not only that, but also looking at what is our own individual social responsibility around this. And so as we have these conversations and we bring this to the forefront, I mean, I think it's just really carrying it forward.
And one of the things about how Black teachers are perceived in classrooms, because I got to talk about it on a classroom level, we're not necessarily empowered to do the things that could turn around a lot of these things. For instance, being on curriculum teams, writing teams, being professional learning community leaders. And you're going to get some schools that are going to say, oh, we got to get some assistant principals in there. We got to get some principals in there because the look alone, right? But some of those things underneath, people aren't sitting there saying to the average Black teacher there, hey, you should think about applying to write curriculum this summer. They're saying, can you help me discipline this student in my classroom who's Black, right? And so what happens when you're finally empowered, I say finally because that was my journey, right? It was like 23 years teaching and year 19, all right, let's do this, big guy. And finally we trust you, right? And, and so when it happened, then I was able to say, oh, I gotta help figure out solutions to this overall problem that I see now. Whereas before I'm just surviving. And so when I finally, that now I'm thriving, right now it's like, okay, now I'm on all the teams. I was like, all right, I will try and do everything possible to fight for our students, right? And then on top of that, I will make sure that my brothers are taken care of and make sure I talk to them. But until you empower them, they're fighting, they're surviving there, just like, man, I've been called down a district, looked at dirty, talked about straight up to my face, or talked about behind my back so often. I just got to get in here, teach my students to get out of there.
Dr. Moon?
I was just going to say, it seems to me that we're sprinting and we're doing all that we can in a short amount of time. And it seems to me that we've got to make a paradigm shift in how we're thinking about Black male educators. My thoughts is that we can't wait until our males get into middle school and high school. We have to start when they're in elementary school. And we have to start having conversations with them about becoming teachers and seeking out a career in education. I read a couple of studies that alluded to that parents are now wanting their kids to be introduced to STEM careers at the age of 5 years old. My thought is, why can't we do that with our African American male kiddos and have them start thinking about careers in education? Now that means that it's going to have to, number one, involve funding, policy, and it's going to also have to involve research. Because what we have to find out is that if I start with Cliff Moon when he's age 5, and then he completes his higher education and goes into a teaching career, is that feasible? It also means that we have to do something systemic. I know with some schools, the elementary schools are doing one thing, the middle schools are doing something else, and the high schools are doing something else. If we are really, truly explicit about getting those kids of color, males, in education, then we've got to come together as a collective and we've got to work together collaboratively.
Thank you. All right, we are at that time in our program where I wanted to open it up to the audience here. Does anybody have a question from the audience? All right. Oh, hold on, we're gonna get you a mic so that everybody can hear you, including our folks watching online.
Hi, everybody. I had experience to be working as a school psychologist in University of Chicago in Chicago. And in the Department of Education, what as I see is that the University of Chicago was working with the school systems around the school, and everybody, or mostly everybody in the Department of Education or Faculty of Education, University of Chicago come from that schools. And that schools are located in the most difficult socioeconomical environment in Chicago. And they made a big change in that society. Because that kids come from a very difficult environment and now are the university professors in University of Chicago. That is a big collaborative project with all universities around that had the fundings to educate that schools, to promote different programs over there and fundings for research, because all of those kids write the books that are in the libraries in University of Chicago. And they are the ones that promote all of the research programs around. And I was very happy to see that change because everybody comes from that environment. And I was one of the school psychologists working for one of the high schools. And I see how difficult are that the students. In 12th grade, they are not doing the right thing they had to do as a 12th grade students, but we had to work hard with them to help them to get there. And I see that also is a political issue in this country. It's not only for Black men, it's all for all people of color. So it's a big change that we had in the US now, because we had the fortune to have an African American male as a US president. So we are making changes. However, we need to change many things, not only Black male teachers. It's also gender, it's also ethnicity, it's all of those diversity features, factors that we need to move forward in order to change this society. But we are in the process, because I know the schools like University of Phoenix, University of Chicago are working on. So we need all elements from our society around, such as school districts, universities, and entrepreneurships, companies, multinational companies, all of that people around to get the fundings, to get the researchers, to get the members of the society to make this change.
Thank you for your comment.
So it was interesting, she bringing up the former president, President Obama, because he tried to do the Teach campaign, which his plan was 5% increase in Black male teachers. And obviously we know there's not been a 5% increase in Black male teachers because there's 2% of, so that didn't go down, right? And then kind of where your point was in the beginning, then programs like in North Carolina and programs like Oakland, like Teach for Tomorrow, and programs in North Carolina, they were in this study also, Call Me Mister, Call Me Sir, programs on a local level that were doing some really positive things. So I do love the University of Chicago. I did not know that, but I did know of these programs from the book. I do think that, yes, locally, you can make that kind of a change. Whereas federally, it will be tough because we saw that happen. We saw a Black male trying to make these conditions better for Black males, and it did not work.
That's a great point.
So it was like, okay, we need to hit it on our neighborhood levels. We need people like the panel and things like that. And that was kind of one of my points about empowering teachers, because they could be one of those resources, and of course, superintendents and all of them.
Absolutely, thank you. That prompts another thought for me too. I'm curious, Dr. Underwood or Medgar or anybody else who has perspective on this. In your research, have you come across places that are doing better than others in this work to get more Black male educators hired? Like even now, like today, not programs that have now ended preferably, but programs that are still in existence, or just local school districts that are doing something?
Well, I have to call out University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm an alum, so I think that, Alfred Tatum, Dr. Tatum and his team, they are doing amazing work around Black male educators. And so definitely have to call them out on that. The Call Me Mister program is doing just amazing work. And, in really thinking about this, and I agree, Kareem, 100%, we really looked at it from the fact that, you do have these grassroots efforts. We put a lot of reliance on alternative certification. And when we talk about programs like Troops to Teachers, how to be successful, especially for people who do not have that 4-year, degree going straight into the classroom, they can get those credentials that allow them to get licensure. But, in even thinking about all of this, all of these efforts, we're still at 2%. And and I have bad news, because the number is going down, and 2% is a small number anyway, but then, you're losing 1/10 of a percentage every year or so much, that number is going down. And so we're just remaining static. These efforts are keeping us static. And so I think that, really looking at more of partnerships, and I mean, we have to come together and hit this hard, to really make some type of a difference, and and one of the things that I will say is keeping this at the forefront. Department of Education, I looked at their website, and, I think I haven't seen any updates, So when do we keep this at the forefront of conversations at DOE? And then at other schools and at other levels with other people, with lawmakers, and people who can create policy to keep this at a level where we make a difference.
And it can't be drowned overall at the whole, we got to also make sure we cover everybody then, right? Because we do know, obviously, that, communities of all communities of color, and we do know that, all gender spectrum and LGBTQ and all that, we all know that. But when we're talking about this thing, we need to stay focused on this thing. We can focus on other things at other times.
Yeah. All right, let's take another question from the audience. I think I have somebody over here. Yes.
So I have a challenge
And
for
if
the
you don't
panel.
mind, state your name.
My name is Henry Cooper. I have a challenge for the panel. I appreciate everything that's being done, the work that was done in the study. However, I question one thing. We have 17% of the population of the United States that is Latino. We have less than that is population of African Americans. How can we make a paradigm shift when the smallest portion of the population, besides Asians, how can we make a shift when we've got a small number? So instead of shifting that to look at simply Black males in the classroom, if we were to combine all people of color, as Dr. Mendeville stated, we have a much greater chance of finding the funding because we've got people empowered to deliver that funding, and then develop large-scale programs that start to talk about people of color. As long as we isolate, we allow the people who separated us for hundreds of years. We've got Latinos here, we've got Blacks over here, we've got Mexicans here. You know, if you go to Los Angeles, they all live together, but they have different gangs. That's ridiculous. But we're perpetuating that by saying we have to get Black males in the classroom. We have people of color in all classes. And it's only people of color uniting that's going to make this change. It's not going to be getting a small number from a small population pool and making that shift happen. And I just wanted to get some comments from the panel on that.
I can jump in and start.
Please.
And I understand what you're saying. I get it. And even, you know, someone asked, you know, would I be working with the Latino culture and looking at, you know, this from that lens? And I said, absolutely. But I think that we have to really frame this on where this started. And this started with the Black Male Fellowship at NNSTOY, right? And so being able to be privileged, to have insight into that perspective of understanding the challenges, understanding sometimes the heartache, and as well as the triumphs of 12 Black educators, male educators, was something that was amazing to me because I knew I might not ever get that opportunity again as a bystander. And understanding the uniqueness that they face and they talked about. And so, you know, with that in mind, that's where this paper focused. And at the very smallest percentage, yes, I want to make the loudest noise around that, but then also noting that we're still looking at that 20% and understanding that as well. And so, you know, I always tell Megger, we always have work to do. You know, there's always research. And right now we've just opened this just a little bit and we're ready to bust it wide open. So, you know, knowing that there's still work to be done and we're going to look at this through different lenses. But yes, I definitely understand.
And like when we look at it, like as we were doing the research, we realized that these topics are intertwined with some differences with regard to focus. And I think that what happens is, and part of the reason why we did what we're doing is, it's such a big problem that if we try to take care of all of it at the same time, we're not going to get anywhere. And so we had to pick a place to focus, and that smallest number was a good place to make the biggest impact quickly. But I can say definitely that work is going to be done as well.
And if I may respond, because thank you for your observation. And I understand the paper priority in studies and certainly agree, but being a Hispanic male administrator in this state is all in itself an accomplishment, and I know that. However, I as a superintendent, my role, and that's the key piece in our roles and responsibility, I have to look at what strategies are going to be most impactful for our teachers, most beneficial for our teachers who in some school settings may be predominantly white, However, they're in school settings that are diverse. Some our school settings are predominantly Latino and others are not. But our community is very diverse. So I have to look at how can I make the most impact with the recruitment, retention, induction, conditions, all of that when you lead the charge of a school district and put priorities that all kids should learn and have that opportunity to learn at high levels when they come to Tempe Union, and that we have that responsibility to make that happen. So how am I going to equip my teachers and my staff to give them the best strategies so that they can realize the value that their diverse students bring to the classroom every day, make them part of that whole process of learning? How are we going to make sure that our curriculum is culturally inclusive? And we've made a deliberate effort with that. There's all those conditions that I talked about earlier that will have a larger impact on my charge as superintendent to make sure that our kids, all our students, are learning at high levels. So the diversity is critical and for all our children of color.
And I just want to say I appreciate your comments as well. But I also think that it is imperative that we blunt this deficit narrative about Black African males that's going on in our country right now. Our kids on a daily basis are hearing about Black males being harmed, being shot, don't have health care, unemployed, incarcerated. And so somehow we have got to make sure that Black young males have a different story that they can hear, that they can listen to, and that they can aspire to become. So thank you.
All right. We have time for one more question. And I'm going to take it from the audience listening on Skype. Unfortunately, I appreciate that you guys have questions here, but we did promise that we would do some questions. So we'll do one from them. And that question, I'm just going to read it as I have it here. It says, "Thank you all for taking the time to share and inspire. The relatability is a huge factor. I know that my boys need to hear from somebody that they can relate to. As a teacher of 6th grade impressionable boys, I'm trying to think of how I can impact them in a way that connects them to these mentors. What are some of the multicultural ideas that we need to start shifting to?" Just open that up. I think this, I'm going to presume a little bit maybe here, but I think they're looking for something tangible that this person can do in their classroom next week.
So in my previous incarnation, I was an English teacher. And so we start thinking about, like, as we start thinking about the reasons why we need to have people of various backgrounds in classrooms, part of it is because of the awareness that you have of various traditions and various literatures that would reflect different cultures inside that. As a high school English teacher, I taught the canon, but as I matured into my role and started to realize that there were other works and other authors that I was going to be able to use to teach my children. And as I kind of reflected and saw myself in those, I also realized that I was also going to be able to see my students in those. So going through and being able to have those kinds of stories, which is a part of the value of diversity in schools, right? When you have more people from diverse backgrounds, you're going to have more of an opportunity to have people who are going to be more aware of the different places that you can find these examples. That's where you bring children in. They need to see themselves in every single lesson that they do. They need to be able to look around at the people around them and see that there is a chance that they can become that person. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to look like them, but it helps sometimes. And so building those stories and building those experiences, either through mentorship programs or through literature or through whatever other cultural options you have to do that is a good way to make that happen, in my opinion.
Okay.
I also think,
Kareem, go ahead.
I also think community building circles are really great because one thing that is kind of cringeworthy to me is when someone says, all right, I got a decent amount of Black students in my class, so I'm about to just start talking about some Black stuff, right? Mm-hmm. The reason why I love things like community building circles is because you then start to actually get to know your students, which is not an easy thing. We just assume we know them. Like we analyze their writing, and we call on them in class, and they answer some questions, and we assume we know them, or we read a report about them. But that process gives you a chance to really get to know them, and you start basic, start easy questions, and you get into deeper stuff so that you actually really understand your students before you then start using writings and arts and things like that. So I would say, to add on to that, which I think is beautiful, to make sure you're doing something like that so you don't just be like, oh, okay.
Check your assumptions.
I'm in this way, yeah.
Get to know them as people, right? Any other thoughts on that question? All right. Well, thank you, everybody who's here in the audience here in Phoenix today. And I'd like to thank all those who tuned in on Skype for this webinar. We really appreciate having you. I just wanted to make a quick announcement that tomorrow is the Arizona Multicultural Education Conference happening here. Everybody is still invited, right? If you're not already registered and stuff, you can still come to that and learn even more. It'll be a broader scope than this experience today, but it's something we'd encourage you to try to get to. But I just want to give it up for our panelists. Shall we give them a round of applause? All right. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.